how are we doing? How are our heads this morning? Did anyone overdo it last night? Yeah, I was speaking, so I was a good boy. Just a quick check while I'm here. How many people have seen me talk before? Hands up, anyone? Oh, okay. Yeah, it's like a family crowd almost, isn't it? You know, we all know each other. We can all, look at each other and go, yeah, we're part of the Unity tribe. We can cope with this. I don't know if anyone's, like I said, a few of you have seen me talk. I'm going to try and give you a kind of perspective of what it's like being a guy that's run lots of game services. A lot of talks you'll get at Unite and various other events are going to try and tell you the how, the technically kind of how you set things up within the engine. I'm going to try and do that empower success part and try and share some of my experience of running successful services. Things like, back in the day, there was a service called Wireplay, which is one of the first dial-up modem-based multiplayer games. Probably no one in the room will remember that. It was the biggest in Europe at the time, like 98, 99. I used to run that, and then I was also an operator, one of those evil operators that decided which mobile Java games would go on. But we made quite a lot of money for people. And I was also involved in a project that some people might remember fondly, PlayStation Home. Anyone remember PlayStation Home? Yeah, there's a few fanboys still out there. We're still wearing our black armbands. The cruelest thing Sony ever did was close PlayStation Home down on April the 1st. But anyway, so let's see what we can do. I'm going to try and give you that picture of what's going on in our games and how we look at it differently, because it's so easy to get snowblinded by data. And I don't want to just see lots of things and try and guess what's happening. I want to empower you so that when you look at your game and when you start using things like Unity Analytics, that you know how to get the best out of every other aspect of your experience. And I want you to focus on your player. I'm not going to try and focus you on eCPM or CPI or all these or ARP-DAOs or all that kind of stuff. All of that stuff's useful. All those acronyms are great things to know. But if we don't pay attention to the player, we're going to miss out. So a while ago, I wrote this little book called Games as a Service, and I stole this graph. It's still the thing I show most often, because it's the thing that basically has affected my managing of every service I've ever done. And it comes down to how people adopt technology and their reactions to it. It's stolen from the Gartner hype curve. I'm not going to go into long explanations. I've got plenty of other stuff to talk about. But I want you to think about this as the journey that you go through when you buy a pair of jeans, when you play a game for the first time. You have to have enough excitement and anticipation of what's coming next if you're going to actually go to the bother of downloading or buying or going to the shop. All those things that you have to do in order to get that object of desire. But in doing so, we fill the gaps in our knowledge with our imagination. We assume things about the product that it doesn't ever say it will have. Think about the games that we thought were going to be amazing, and when we got there, they weren't quite what we were hoping, because our expectation filled the gap between what we were told. At the same time, in a game in particular, we don't know the control schemes. We are going to have the worst possible experience the very first time we play a game. So think about that. So more than that, though, our job as developers is to get people to carry on playing. If this is a product, if I put a CD in a plastic box and put it on a retail shelf, you've already paid your money. Fine, thank you very much. I can put my feet up, I don't care. Well, okay, I do care because I want good reviews. But I don't actually need to make sure you have a good time. Now, if I have a free-to-play game, that's completely different. Because not only have I got all that anticipation loss and that frustration with lack of understanding of controls, I've also not committed any money. I've got no reason to carry on playing, not least because there's an infinite supply of content out there. And I'm not joking when I say infinite. There's more content than I can possibly play in my lifetime already out there. And we all want to make games. There's so much out there. We can't possibly succeed, can we? Well, the way we succeed is by understanding what players do, need, and how their behavior changes. And what our job is going to be is trying to keep them going from that buyer remorse moment, that, oh, why did I do this? Hold their hands and take them through their life cycle so they become truly engaged. And when they become truly engaged, that's when we have some magic. So that's what I want to try and get us to think about. But before we do that, let's start some basic, trying to understand how much of us we know about data already. Anyone, hands up if you know what I mean by geodemographics. No? Okay, a couple, yeah. So basically simple. It's like, who am I, where am I, what's my age, sex, location, nothing complicated. It's the basic kind of raw materials that marketeers like me, I admit it, I'm a trained marketeer, I'm sorry, please don't throw fruit at me. I'm not an evil one, don't worry. I believe in empowering developers. So knowing where people are from can be very useful. Traditionally, it was the only way we had any insight on what players did. But increasingly, it's not the most useful thing. Actually, the really interesting stuff, and stuff that we can really understand in games more than any other medium, is behavioural information. Don't tell me what they said they would do. Show me what they actually did. We can do that. We can create events. We can actually capture activity and measure changes in behaviour. We can do that on the fly. We can have real-time information that lets us understand what people are doing and why. But there's another type of data which is also useful and you should think about, which is operational data. And sometimes there's a consequence between what happens in operational situations, like a server going down, or maybe there's a problem with the spinning up of a virtual instance of a particular location. You only find that out if you'll be able to compare the operational data with the player behavioral data. And then you can make some insights. So we saw some of that at the keynote. Did we all see John talking about analytics yesterday? Yeah? Cool. So you kind of get a sense of what that was about. But I'm more of a businessy kind of guy. I'm a game designer, yes, but I'm more interested in making successful content. And so I want to know about this thing called funnels. Anyone not know about funnels? Put your hands up if you do not know about funnels, okay? Couple here. So a funnel is basically really simple. How many people started the game? Okay, that's my top of my funnel. How many people started the game and then went to press the menu button that says play? Okay, that's going to be a slightly smaller number. And then how many people got to the first level? Actually, the levels did start up and it was successfully playable. Okay, that's another number. How many people then actually played it through to the end of that level? Here's another number. How many people started the next level? Here's another number. And you'll always find it comes down. Because you always lose some people. And of course, when you line it up like this, it looks like a funnel. But it allows us to decide what did people do at various steps. So we can say, okay, this point here, I'll give you a real-world example. PlayStation Home. People used to be able to start up and go into the world, and we found they got to their apartment, and we lost them. There was a massive drop-off in the apartment. We were thinking, what's that about? And it was only when we actually started doing, interrogating people, looking at the data, we suddenly realized the way they spawned in the apartment faced away from the door. Let me carry on through, because we'll take questions later. I want to keep the flow going. So think about that. If we face the wrong way in an apartment, how are we going to know that it's the wrong way unless we actually look at what people actually do? Does that make sense? So that's one of the kind of things I want to try and get us to think about. We look at funnels, it allows us to get that kind of information really clear because it's very visible. But there's some other things that we can do. Now, how many people are using Unity Analytics already? Anyone? Yeah, a few of you guys? Next time we come back here, next year, let's have all the hands up. Genuinely, it is that good. It is that useful. And I'm using it in my own game as well. I'm not just kind of talking about this stuff. I'm actually using it in my own stuff. There's this idea of custom events. We'll talk about some examples, but essentially, I want to trigger an action, an event, on some action. So let's say I shoot my opponent, okay? At that point, I want to know, where was that player when he shot? What session were they in? And there's a whole string of data points that I will have associated with that action. That's a custom event. Here's an event, this thing happens, here's the data associated with that event. Really kind of interesting stuff that we can do with it. In fact, you can go further. You can actually compare events. So if I know I've got the same session ID, I've got the player IDs, by the way, always anonymize your player IDs. It's for data protection reasons. It's really sensible to keep the actual player identifications very separate from your data of performance of play. Just a little tip. So if I know who the player is and what they've done, I can then compare other people in that session who have that shared session ID and what they did. So for example, if I had a character who shot their gun, fired their bullet at XYZ location, and then I've got another player who's been hit by that bullet, I know that because I've got the ID of the original shooter, for example, I can then start mapping out in my heat maps where the choke points are in my first-person shooter. I can start getting really deep insight about what people are actually doing and why and what timing and how that works. Another thing that's really important, and again, this is just trying to get you kind of understanding some of the base principles, is, by the way, that's supposed to be a Roman cohort. That's not the best example, best picture, but hopefully you get where I'm coming from. We want to create selected groups, custom segments, people who we have shared commonalities so we can compare their actions with another. The most important one I learned very early on was the number of days that that person had played. So I grouped together all the people who've been playing for 1 day, all the people who've been playing for 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, and I looked at a graph based on their behavior, based on the flow of their experiences by the number of days. And the weird thing is, the graph I saw looked like that. The moment I started comparing people's activity, I started seeing this pattern about their life cycle based on the amount of time they spent playing. Of course, a lot of this is going to come down to how we present the data, and graphs and funnels are great, and heat maps, again, most of us saw the panel yesterday, so I'm not going to go into, sorry, the keynote yesterday, so I'm not going to go into too much detail on heat maps, but being able to think about what people do and how they do it and present it inside your game is incredible. First time I ever saw that was when I was at Sony and I saw the guys doing Killzone 3, looking at the maps, and the amount of work that went in to make sure that the maps were balanced that was only possible because they could see what people actually did in play. It's incredibly powerful stuff. But I want to raise a question. Now, this is particularly relevant for free-to-play games. If you think about it, how many people will pay in a typical free-to-play game? Anyone want to suggest a number, percentage of players who've ever downloaded? 2%? Yeah, that's not far off. I mean, again, I tend to argue we shouldn't call the people who download players. They're more suspects rather than even prospects. But let's stick with that 2%. Let's assume, similarly, how many people are going to still be playing, say, after 90 days? About the same? 1%. Let's say 1%. So basically, if we want to know all the behavior that people might do in 90 days, we've only got 1% of the audience to measure their behavior. How can we make assumptions based on how we get a bigger audience if the only data we have available is the 1% who stayed? Does that make sense to try and make business decisions when the majority of the people who got to that stage are already biased and we've lost all the others? So we need a different way to look at it. We need a different way to think about data because it's too easy to make suppositions based on this gap, this missing information. But what we do have is what people did at each stage of the flow of the game. And if we think about acquisition, retention, monetization, which is the sort of classic way that we look at funnels, if you're a salesperson or a business person like me, look at these things like how many people have I got in, how many people do I keep, how much money do I get, how many people spend money. This is a really simple way to look at it, but it kind of fails if you don't look at a little bit more detail. If you're going to actually sustain your game over a period of time, then I think it needs to look a bit more like this. How many people went through the discovery stage? They found us, they installed the game. That's a brilliant thing to know. And what's interesting is their needs are very different from the people in the next stage who are learning about what it's like to play your game. And they're not just learning how technically to play, physically to play, but they're also learning where does your game fit into their daily routine. How many of you think about the daily routine of the player and why they choose your game as opposed to something else? Anyone? Yeah? Good. You guys are doing the right thing. You should be thinking about the niche slot in the awareness and the kind of mindset of the player as much as possible because it's an easily overlooked thing. They have another life. Your game is not the only thing that they're obsessed with. least I hope not. Although, maybe, I don't know. We can debate that later. But the point is that we need to understand what their needs are. And if their needs at this stage are all about where does this game fit, when we actually get them to engage, they already know the answer to that. They've already decided, yes, it does fit, and this is how I'm going to play. When they're engaged, their needs start to be more different. They need maybe more depth. In fact, what they need is going to depend on your game. You will know more about what these guys need at an engaging stage than I ever will. And of course, we want to convert them. We want to convert them to spend money, especially if we're a free-to-play game. But sometimes we also want to convert them to actually using our video ad network, to use rewarded ads, for example. We might have any number of different monetization models in the game. We might even have interstitials or whatever you want to have. But if we're not thinking about the flow and the need states of each player, we're going to be missing an opportunity. The one thing I think we don't pay enough attention to is the last bit. Because I don't think spending money in the game once is good enough. If I find players are spending once in my game, I've failed. Do you know why? Anyone want to suggest why? Because if they haven't spent twice, they didn't enjoy the first time. That means I made it bad. I didn't make it exciting enough. I didn't make it glorious enough. And if you saw my panel yesterday with Sarah and Yomi and Marat, Sarah said this, they want the moment of opening up that thing that you bought or that thing that you've won to be amazing. Because they want you to do it again and again. And that's how we build successful games. I'm going to throw in a few stats every once in a while. This is basically information we gathered from a survey that Unity Ads team pulled together. We all know that retention is important. It's interesting, though, that 52% of mobile developers identify video ads as providing the highest revenue per user compared to other types of in-game advertising. Now, what's interesting about that is that there is clearly a balance between how we want to present the way we make money. Sometimes it's going to be ads. Sometimes it's going to be in-app purchase. Sometimes they're going to be rewarded. What I want to do is start taking you on this journey. So I want you to take something practical out of this talk so that when you go and you sit in your game, you can actually say, oh, okay, that Oscar said I should be thinking about these stages. What do I do? Well, let's look at discovery. What do people need at discovery? What kind of measurements do I look for? Now, you may have your own views on this. Feel free to tell me what you think. But my view is at the discovery stage, I'm looking after this kind of stuff. Where are my customers, where are my players coming from? In fact, actually, if it's a free-to-play game, where are my suspects coming from? How many of them are converting into prospects, i.e. they're playing regularly, or they're at least getting through the tutorial? How many of those are actually converting to act further? So, I'm looking for attribution, I'm looking for source, the platform they come from. Have they actually ever launched the game? Think about how many people measure the number of downloads they've got and the number of people, compare it with the number of people who've ever launched the game. Anyone doing that? Why aren't you all doing that? Because if you think about it, you should know that. You should know like instantly, because it's one of the most critical things. If you've gone to the bother of trying to show people a game and get them to install it, whether it's through PR, through personal relationship, through spending money on advertising, whatever else it is, if they're not opening that icon, you've got something wrong. So you can focus on solving a single problem right now by looking at the difference between the number of people who open your app and those who downloaded it. That is one problem that will have a dramatic impact on everything else that happens later in the funnel. Another thing I think is really interesting to learn, and this is the PlayStation Home example, how long does it take from launching the game to actually playing? Think about that. Now, I kind of have a go at console games for this. In particular, Watch Dogs, and I think Final Fantasy 14 or something as well did the same thing, where I spent I think it was literally 5.5 minutes pressing X. And I think I pressed X about 8 times in that time. 5.5 minutes playing a game, and I've just pressed the X button 8 times. What the hell? If you do that on mobile, guess what happens? Anyone want to guess? They go. They're gone. If you haven't got their attention in about 6 seconds, they're already out of here. They're not coming back, ever. Think about that. Pay attention to how many people are actually launching your game. How many people are going to actually play it? How long does it take them to actually play it? Let's carry on here. I will take loads of questions later, don't worry. The next thing is learning. So we talked about the learning stage and people trying to understand where they are in a particular game and how they get handled around the controls, where it fits in their lifestyle. This is the kind of really key area because we're assuming now we've got a cohort here. We've got a group of people we know has launched our game. Not only have they downloaded it, we know they have launched it because they wouldn't be in this group if they hadn't actually launched it. They have actually started playing at some point. That's fantastic information. We already know about these people. So what are we after now? What kind of information are we after now? Who comes back the next day? Now, I tend to use day 2 retention. Some people call it day 1. I like to call it day 2 because otherwise you should be calling day 30, day 29. That's me being picky, I know. But that's just a little thing that I do, and I get told off by various people for saying day 2. But I want to know who comes back the next day. That's my important thing, the next day. And we can measure that. It's an easy thing to measure. We can try and work out why. We can work out why by going back at some of the behavioral information. What did the people do that didn't come back? That's different from the things that the people did who did come back. We can measure that. We can test that. It's nothing complicated. It's not kind of weird data analyst stuff. It's basic, pure game designer sits down, looks at what people did, looks at what people did in this other one, and compares the two. That's basic iteration stuff. So you don't have to be a data analyst to get value out of data. Who actually initiated the second level after completing the first? I mean, not every game has levels, but hopefully you get the general principle. What do they do that gets them out of that tutorial? Are you making them spawn facing away from the door? Is that what's causing the problem? And what happens when you turn them around? In fact, should you get rid of the apartment entirely? Peter's at the back there, he knows exactly what I'm talking about. So there's all this kind of thing. Also, where was the last position that the player was in the game? There's actually another interesting problem I found. It's not always the case, but when you end a session in a game, if you just shut it down, you quite often don't get the opportunity for the app to post the last bit of data. So you have to be careful about how do you make sure it posts that data at some point. If you've got live real-time feeds, it's okay, but you can get to the point where you miss data and you have to be able to pay attention. What's the last bit of information I have about this person before they close the app down? Imagine if I go out of coverage and I'm carrying on playing, the game hasn't worked out, I've lost network yet, and I've done something catastrophic. You've lost that data unless you've paid attention to your design. Another bit of kind of random data. I think you've seen this one yesterday as well. The reason why I go on about this lifecycle stuff is that just the sheer importance of retention. Retention is incredibly. We know that, particularly free-to-play games, scale absolutely matters. 3 ways to get scale: get more people, get them playing longer, get them doing more stuff. Very simple. And we want to use this lifecycle model to make sure that we get them doing more stuff as well as keeping them longer. So we've got them. We know that our cohort that we had in discovery, we found out what the problems are there, we've tried to fix some of them. We've now gone into this learning stage, we found out what they're doing, what their needs are. We try to work out what the difference is between those who keep playing and those who stop playing. Now, hopefully, if we've got people playing regularly, we can safely call them engaged players. So what do they need that's different? So I'm now looking generally about day 7. Some people use day 3. Depends on your game, what your preferences are. I personally like day 7. I'm also looking at the conversion to pay. So if I've got a game that's got in-app purchase, I want to know how many people are converting. But interestingly, what's the activity prior to converting? Quite often, people spending money in your game is a complicated process because there's different forces that get in the way of us making a decision to buy. I've got to anticipate the value of the thing I'm going to get. I've got to have a sense of kind of what I will miss out on if I don't get it now. I've also got to know the social context in which that happens. But the fourth piece is a little bit harder to get your head around. They have another life, and you've got to overcome the other needs that they have. Should they be doing the washing up rather than playing the game? That's often my case. I should probably be doing the washing up. I actually play the game to avoid doing the washing up, but don't tell my wife. But that's the point. It's work out what it is, what consistent actions you can measure, and how you can use that to help understand what's going on and why. Look at the frequency of how often they're watching your rewarded ads. What's the deviation? If you look over time, those engaged players, is there a rate of change about how often they succeed or fail in the game? Is there a pattern by how many times they failed before they quit? What patterns can you find out in terms of what their behavior is, when and how? I particularly like trying to work out where the first point of conversion is. So is it they play a particular level, they find it difficult, they then watch a video ad to respawn, and then can finish the level? Is that the first point of conversion? How do we make that experience wonderful? How do we make the process feel like it was worthwhile, and the fact that I chose to use a rewarded video ad to do it wasn't a defeat? Yami from FuturePlay made a really interesting point yesterday about the fact that he doesn't want to offer shortcuts associated with failure. He wants to offer rewards associated with success. So when you have an ad or you spend money, you feel good about yourself, you feel like it was a successful and optimistic thing to do. And that has an effect on their success. Another little bit of data, question that often comes up: rewarded video ads, do they cannibalize in-app purchase or not? Now, most of the time, so far, we're seeing no impact. Something like 14% of users are supposedly spending less, but 16% are spending more. Now, remember, this is across the board. When you start talking in person to people like, the FuturePlay guys, the Next Game guys, the Mad Fingers, all these guys who are doing really well in video ads and really well as a game in general, those guys are actually stopping seeing ads as one thing and IAP as another thing, and instead they're looking at the experience of the player and their paying and spending habits as a continuum. Ads can feed into my understanding of the value of a good that I might later buy. But I have to be really careful how I do it and make sure I design it well. For example, in FuturePlay, they have a great mechanism where all of the currency has to be generated through play. And all the rewards you get aren't related to the currency. So they don't cannibalize. In fact, they support each other. My favorite example, though, is Crossy Roads. So think about this, okay? Sorry, anyone not played Crossy Roads? Anyone? Right, go and play it now. Yeah, I'm not joking. No, okay, I'm joking. But, seriously, after this, play it, and you'll see what I mean. So I play it, I watch a rewarded video ad at the end of playing, I get 25 coins. So I only need to watch four of those to get 100 coins. I don't get that video ad option every time, by the way. I get it once every 4 minutes, which keeps me playing longer because, if I play for just a couple more minutes, I'll get another option to get this video ad. I start looking forward to the reward I get from it. In fact, it's one of the reasons why I now use video ads personally to find content. I don't bother with app stores anymore because I find that a more interesting way to find new games. That's me. But the important part of this is, I've carried on playing longer. I then get these 100 coins. I then go to the gacha machine. I get a random character. Anyone seen the Celebrity? Celebrity? Awesome character. Seriously, it's worth getting. I never thought I would buy. I'm not a classic Celebrity kind of looker. But anyway, this sort of little dolly bird kind of character. And you go across the street, and every time she crosses the road, a paparazzi pops up and takes a photo. And it's funny. The funniest thing, though, is when she hits a van, puff of money goes in the air. And it doesn't affect the gameplay, it's just funny, it's enjoyable, and I got it randomly. When I got it randomly, I realized how good these characters were, and I saw they had a Frankenstein's monster. I wanted to know what happened with the Frankenstein monster. Now, I could have stayed playing and getting a random character and hope, fingers crossed, that I'd get that character, but I didn't. I chose to buy it. I was actually more encouraged to want to buy because the goods I got from the video ads were random. It actually increased my spending personally. So there's this kind of thinking, this way of changing, where we can actually start thinking, when we've got people engaging, actually can we super engage them? Now that's just shorthand for me to sort of say, will they spend again? But actually we also recognize, in fact, anyone still use the term whale? Anyone? Get out. Sorry. I've decided not to use, I'm trying desperately not to use whale. It was fine when it was, free-to-play consultants like me trying to tell people about things, because it was a nice, easy shortcut. Because most people understand if you go to Las Vegas and you've got a lot of money to spend, you're there to play poker or roulette or slots, and you basically play until you run out of money. That's what a whale does. And in response to that, to make sure that you spend that money in their casino, the casino owners give you a room, they give you tickets to the theater, and all the other stuff, the buffet lunches or whatever else it is, because they want you to spend that money with them. That's customer service done well for a group of people who already know what kind of game they're going to be playing and how, a game they're committed to. We don't have the same mindset with games. Games are things different from gambling, where the reward is dopamine-based, not adrenaline-based. I could get into brain chemistry, but I'm not really a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a brain chemist or a neuroscientist. I'm just fascinated by the whole topic. But for trusting my friend Bernie, we're writing a book on the psychology of game design together, we diminish our reward, our sensation of reward in game playing eventually. And the whole point of that means that we have to think differently about what a whale might be in our world. If we design a game only for whales, guess what happens? We kill off everybody else. Because no one... You don't just suddenly appear as a whale. It's a journey to go through. You've got to go through discovery. You've got to go through learning. You've got to engage first, and then you will decide, is this my game? Is this the hobby I'm going to be playing for the next N months, years, whatever? That's a decision you make from experience of playing the game. And we need to know who those people are, not because we're being cynical, but because they have deeper needs. And they want more out of your game, and I want to give my audience what they want. I want them to reward me by paying me, of course, but I want them to feel that I'm giving them real value. But what value means to them is going to differ. I was working at a small mobile group called Papaya. I had a game called X City. Okay, so X City is a city building game, pretty average one, arguably. We had a Chinese lady who spent $35,000 in 9 months. Now, what does that tell you? $35,000 in 9 months. First thing it tells you is she can afford it. Do you know how I know that? Because she kept spending for 9 months. There's a thing we learned back in the operator days. If somebody overspends, guess what they do? They walk away and they never spend another cent. We used to call it bill shock. We had this real case where people had bill shock, and if you spent more money than you could afford, you never spent anything again. So as an operator, that was the last thing I wanted to happen. But the other thing it tells you is that she was getting value out of it. And when we asked her, we actually did some surveys and found her. She was a footballer's wife in China, so she wasn't lacking money, should we say. But all of her friends were basically trying to build the biggest, most full, most expensive, because it was part of what they did, world. And that's what they were showing off to each other. Their enjoyment was one-upmanship on each other. And I'm quite happy if somebody wants to use my game to one-upmanship other people, as long as it doesn't compromise the play of other players. I have to retain the integrity of the game for everybody, but still provide the opportunity for those true fans to spend true fan money. And that's why super engaging is something we still need to pay attention to. But again, I'm going to come back to what Yanni said. If you're going to avoid triggering rewards, not just video ads, but IAP in general, when the players run out of money, needs a lifeline, or just fails, but instead create positive experiences at all times. This is what I love about what we do. We're making entertainment, and when we focus on the joy of the player, we are rewarded by being more successful. So what are we looking for when we super engage? Well, we're looking for probably day 15 retention, arguably. Some people go straight for the day 30. I kind of like day 15 because a little stat that we found when I was working at Papaya is it took 8 to 12 days for a whale, I know I use the phrase, but a super engaged player to start spending at all. Which is really interesting, because they had to be really committed to the game before they'd even consider spending. But once they had, that audience would spend $100 a month every month. I mean, that was that particular game at that particular time. So I'm not saying everyone's going to do that. But if you pay attention to those audiences that start spending later, but do it continuously, you might identify a segment that you should map. These might be your super engaging users. And you'll find your own data points, but let's find out what that day 15 looks like. How many are repeat using ads? How many are repeat using an app purchase? Is there a rate of change over time? Can you map their activity to the performance in terms of their money contribution, whether it's indirect or direct? And also, what's the level of social communication? I haven't really covered that, but I think if you remember, I was talking about 4 forces that affect the way we buy things. Social is an absolutely incredibly important part, and so often neglected. We assume that it just means a Facebook update, which basically doesn't work. So why would we do it? And actually, when I show someone, my incredible car collection in CSR racing, I'm doing something kind of personal. I'm feeling good about myself. Look what I've got. Look what I've unlocked. Isn't that awesome? This is my game. This is my hobby. And when you see my passion and joy for that game, you can't buy that. That's the most powerful marketing on the face of the planet. And it's more powerful than app stores. It's more powerful than adverts and all that. So we want to capture that and use that to ensure that we have great experiences. What are you doing? How are you measuring social interaction? How are you encouraging that process to happen? So we've got our audience. They've come in. They've learned whether the game fits for them. They've learned that they want to play regularly. That's all great stuff. We can isolate all these people so far. We've found out whether they're a super engaging player or not. And by the way, I'm actually quite happy to have a repeat player that doesn't pay, especially if they spend time on ads. But anyway, I'm quite happy having these repeat players because what they do is they create a context, that social thing I was talking about, the reason for people who are going to spend money. Because if no one else is playing this game, why would I bother? If no one can see that I have the awesome hat of wonder, why would I buy it? And having that audience, that other audience that can communicate about their enjoyment of our game, that can communicate the value of spending money in our game, without necessarily having to spend money in the game, is still incredibly powerful. We ignore it at our peril. But people will churn. Churning, you've all heard the term churn before, I'm hoping. Anyone not understand what that means? Okay, so churn, I think it really originates from operator, mobile carriers and fixed line carriers. Churn just means leaving. So they've gone through the process and they churn out. So they're just leaving us. It's just, as marketeers, we like to come up with great phrases to describe basic normal actions. They stop using our service. But it doesn't sound as cool as they churned. If some of you know what I mean. Anyway, so, but re-engagement. Why are you all of you spending time identifying the people about to churn and finding ways to inspire them to want to carry on playing? Are you doing that every day? All the hands are up? No? Why not? Oh, there's a couple. Good. Great. You guys are obviously doing the right thing. You come and do this lecture. No, I'm joking. So, I mean, the point is, though, actually paying attention to people's behavior and what are the triggers before they actually churn, before they actually leave. If we can identify them before they happen, maybe we can get them playing another day, maybe another week. If we can get more people staying longer, there's a direct correlation between the amount of money they're willing to spend in a game and their willingness to spend in a game and the amount of time they play. I mean, it's pretty obvious that it would be, but it's still there. So we should be looking for any change in behavior after we do updates. Because normally an update will trigger, well, it depends on the update, it will often trigger a reburst of activity for some people, but others it won't. If we see this player or set of players who traditionally had a burst of activity after an update and they stop doing it, maybe there's a problem. Maybe we should be targeting those individuals and trying to find ways to help them keep playing. Or maybe even just asking them what's going on. And you might find, oh, I just moved on to another game. Okay, fair enough. Or it might be, oh, something's happened in my work life or whatever. You don't know what it'll be, but why aren't we asking these people? In fact, most of the time we shouldn't even need to ask. We should be able to just look at the data and see what they did and why. So sorry? Well, let's do the questions afterwards, and we'll try and answer that. You asked a whole bunch of different ways. So is there a change in their pattern of play and their rate of failure? If they start failing more often, is there a pattern by how frequently they fail and before they start churning? And also, how frequently they're coming back to play? If you notice a change in how often they're returning to the game, that might be an early warning sign to pay attention to. Again, another kind of quote here. This is from Sarah from the Next Games. When you have a positive experience that keeps players coming back for more, rewarded video ads. Obviously, I work for the ads team. I'm going to be talking about this. But this is the really important bit. Increased engagement and retention is a definite contributor to increased life cycle and lifetime of the players. That's a massively important piece. There's a fact that's inevitable. Players are going to leave you. Get over it. That's going to happen. And it's okay. But what's important is that we know when they leave, they feel good about the game. And why is that important? Is because they will still tell other people, I used to play that game was great. And if they don't, if instead they say, yeah, I used to play that game, waste of time, is that going to help our sales? Is that going to help our downloads? Is that going to help our lifetime value? It's incredibly important that we understand that players will leave, and we plan for it and prepare for it and make sure that they have the best possible experience and we support them. So they play as long as possible, but also so that when they leave, there's still a base when we do our next game. Hey, I know you played this last time. Here's our latest experience. Come and join us. That creates an incredibly important base for you and something that should never be ignored. But what we're going to do to try and understand it? Well, we can try and work out what's happening in their session length. Have they just stopped playing? Is there increased time between sessions? Some of this stuff we talked about with the re-engaging phase. When they stop returning, that's when we know. Actually, that's a really interesting question. I'll give you an example. PlayStation Home, we thought if you didn't come back in the next month, we were basically lost. You didn't come back. We actually found players coming back 3, 6, and 9 months later. I mean, particularly peculiar experience, of course. It was a console. We were a Sony product. And also we're adding new content all the time. But it's really interesting. Sometimes you think someone's lost and they come back. And that's another reason why it's important to hold on to those churning players, because they leave a soft spot in their heart. In fact, I want them to want to tell their kids how great that game was. I want to make games that people describe to their kids the way that we describe Mario or Elite. That's the stuff I want to do, because that has value to us as an organization, it has value for return, and it also has value to encourage people to return later. I want to give you some examples of the kind of things that I look at in terms of custom events. These are just my views. These are not a data analyst. You can get yourself a data analyst if you've got one. It's great to have one, but these are the kinds of things I look for. So for example, game menu launch. Has the game menu launched? Okay. So I click on the icon. What's the anonymous player ID? Job done. I don't know the time though, the time that the icon was clicked. Because from that I can calculate how long it takes from the time that the icon was clicked to the time when the session itself was launched. So if you've got several layers of menu, several options to select, are we finding things are taking an inordinately long time on the menu page before they actually get to the play? Does that behavior change as they become more, later in their life cycle with you as a player? So that maybe if I'm seeing an engaged player or a super engaged player spending a long time making all their setup selections, that's probably a good thing. And actually, I'll be worried if it's reduced. But if I find it takes an awfully long time for a new player, for a player that's currently learning, it takes more than a minute to get from launching the icon to playing the game, I've probably got a serious problem. So you have to think about that kind of stuff. Session start, time session started, anonymous player ID, session ID. If I have a series of session start events all have the same session ID and lots of different players having those session IDs, I know they're in the same session. It's not really complicated, it's not rocket science, but I know I can then make some interpretations about what happened in that game because I know these are the players, and I don't have to create complicated events. I just have to have an event for each player, what session they're in. Done. Really kind of useful stuff, what objectives they've done, what location. So I don't need to draw the map because I can use heat maps to work out where an event happened in the world. In fact, actually, this is so easy in Unity Analytics that half of the work is done for you. But I want to give you a taste of the kind of things I look for. And so it comes back to this. Why have we gone through that process? Why have we gone through that life cycle? And it's because we want to make sure as many people who discover us take the time to learn how the game fits. And we need to make sure we've done everything we can to do that. We need to know that we're going to go from learning to engaging, that we've done everything we can to take the player with them. Now, this is all pretty common stuff. Every service experience goes through it. There's a fantastic book called Crossing the Chasm by Geoffrey Moore, which is written in the sort of 80s, 90s, which is basically where a lot of this thinking comes from. It's not new stuff. This is not new things. It's not new discoveries. It's just applying basic marketing and service support to what we do in games. Because that's what we're after. We want people to come back, keep playing, keep watching our ads, keep spending money. Because we're a business. We're in the business of entertainment. And the biggest measure of whether they're entertained or not is whether they keep coming back for more. So, that's that. I know there's a burgeoning of questions coming. So I'll take some questions. Have we got a microphone down here, guys? If there's not a microphone, I'll try to repeat the question. Oh, here it comes. The microphone's coming here. So, by the way, I hope that was useful and interesting, or maybe give you a slightly different way of looking at how to use data. That's the plan, anyway. Do you want the gentleman in the blue shirt? I knew you'd ask me lots of questions.
Okay. The first question is, why does it matter the time between download to installation? Sometimes I want I'm in the mood for tower defense, and I download 4 tower defense game. I'm gonna engage one randomly, and the rest, can take days before I start playing.
But you won't engage with them randomly in practice. It might be largely random, but the name of the game, the icon of the game, as it appears on the device, can have a profound effect. So if I'm measuring how long it takes for somebody to download to then actually playing, I have some insight about what's going on. It's not perfect, but the fact that I have some insight gives me the ability to try to change it. So that when I make a change, and by the way, it's really odd how many icons on the App Store have open mouths, like that. And apparently that works. Don't ask me why. But you'll find out what works for your game. And the important thing is not just the time itself, but when you make a change, what impact does that have on the average time? And you can't work that out without working out how long it takes. Now, also, the longer it takes between them downloading and clicking on it, the less likely they are to ever click on it. Someone might be able to correct me, but I think there was an App Annie survey that said something like 80% of apps that were downloaded never got used, ever. It might even be higher than that. It might be in the 90%. Yeah. Now, that's the reason why we need to know, because we need to work out how do we make sure that you're so captivated by this thing that you've just downloaded. This isn't just a tower defense game. This is an MMS. Sorry, you'd have to be British to get that joke. This is an MMS. This is a masterclass. I shouldn't laugh at my own jokes, really. It's really bad. This is a superior tower defense game that does something that no other tower defense game does. Because frankly, if you're not doing something that no other tower defense does, you've failed anyway, probably.
And the second question is, as I asked, how do I ask players why did they leave?
Yeah, so you were asking that earlier. So it's a difficult one because you've got to make a decision whether you're actually going to survey people. I personally like surveying people, but that's a different kind of data. So typically, that's what we call qualitative analysis. So we find a group of people, i.e. here are the people who've done this behavior. We reach out to them and see if they'll respond. We ask them a series of questions, and we then take that information and say, okay, these people said this about the game. Now, quite often, we can't actually target that one person. It's quite difficult, because unless they've hooked up with, I don't know, Facebook or given us an email address or something. And by the way, don't put a registration process at the front of your game, ever. Anyone got a registration process at the beginning of a game? Good. Don't. Just take it out. Do it after they've had a successful gameplay. Because you don't need that then. You want it when they're emotionally engaged. So the point is, back to this. I want information about people and why they do things. But I'm not always able to get it directly. So finding ways to reach out to your community using Twitter and social media, setting up polls, there's lots of different ways. But actually the most profound thing is people will tell you what they think you want to hear. So even if they tell you, guess what? It's probably not true. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't listen to players at all. By the way, you should always, always listen to players. But you have to be a designer, you have to be the owner of your product and stick by your vision for the game. Be informed, but not dictated to by the audience, because often they won't actually have the same level of emotional commitment to their answers. So you look at what they do. And so you set up, for example, an A/B test. Here is an example of someone's actions that, we'll do a level in this way. Then we do this change, and we see the impact of that change. We don't know exactly why, but we know that that version kept more people than this other version. So that's a different way of testing that process. So not necessarily asking them directly, but asking them through their behavior, providing different ways of playing the game. Any other questions? There's one here and there's one at the back.
Hi, I will have only two quick questions to answer. The first one is regarding the keynote yesterday. We could see the FPS and device model. Is it something that is automatically collected by Unity Analytics, or is it something you have to manually collect?
So I'm not an analytics guy. I think it might be, but I don't actually know. Is there any of the analytics team in the room? Because I'm normally talking about the process of how we work as a team with the products. Why don't you come and grab me later and we'll try and get somebody to answer the question. Absolutely.
So probably my second question, you will have maybe the same answer.
Yeah, probably.
You were talking about the discovery stage and attribution. Does Unity Analytics make attributions, or is it something you're looking into?
We will look into it. I think there's some basic stuff that there's lots of services out there we can get attribution. I don't have the full details. Again, let's talk about that later.
Looking forward to it then.
Yeah,
thank you.
Cool. So there was a question at the back there as well. Yeah, so some of these things, because I'm a generalist, I don't always know the in-depth details of the specifics of each tool. I'm more interested in kind of the principles of how we work. So, the question back.
Hi, how many data points would you collect in the first 5 days, second 5 days, and after?
How long have you got? Which license version have you got? It's an interesting challenge, though. I'm not going to answer the question because I don't think there's an easy way to answer that, because it depends is the only answer that really works. I'm looking for the kind of stuff we talked about earlier, because I know that's been useful to me in the past. So this is the kind of things I'm looking for. Now, there's actually not a lot of data points there. If you think about it, there's some events, triggers, and there's some data points, but there's not a huge number of data points there. The crux is going to be, I don't think you need to capture everything. Now, I have arguments with data analysts when I say that, because let's face it, we want all the data we can get, don't we? Yes, of course we do. And of course, if we don't capture something, we can never go back and get it. We can get it from that point onwards when we implement it, but we can't go back and look at what happened before. So we have to be really careful about choosing what we do. But I want to know which ones to choose that are going to give me the most effective result. And the way I do that is actually based on a piece of a process called HACCP, Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Points. It's actually from the food industry. Well, actually, technically, it's from NASA and Pillsbury in the Apollo process. When they were doing the race to the moon, they had to work out how to make sure that the astronauts' food wouldn't kill them. How do you test how food is going to behave without destroying it at the end. I mean, think about that. So, I'm going to create this packaged food that's going to go into this plastic wrapper so that an astronaut can eat it on the moon. How do I test it so that when he gets to the moon, I know it's going to work, it's going to be edible? And because you can't send him any more food. You can't, oh, that didn't work, that batch didn't work, we'll send him some, you can't do that. And so what they did is they went, okay, what are the hazards we're looking for? Metal fragments, glass fragments, plastic, the bacterial content, the nutritional content. So you're looking, you work out what hazards, what problems you're trying to identify. And actually, in our case, they're not always problems. They're often choices that the player will make. So we're trying to identify what choices the player will make. And if we can isolate those, where's the best point to measure it? That's really the crux of it. So if you're trying to work out data points and how many you should have, you're kind of probably asking the wrong question. I think you look at the flow of the game and say, okay, what's the best way for me to get effective information about what players are actually doing in the process of my game so I can get below the bonnet of what they're doing and why? And I can't tell you what that number will be for you, but I can tell you if you think about the player in discovery mode, you're going to come up with a set of them. If you think about the player in the learning mode, you're going to come up with a different set, probably overlapping. Same with engaging. So you'll end up with a series of data points that are practically useful for you and a series of events where we can report on those and measure that usefully. Does that make sense? So it's not a great answer, but hopefully at least gives you something to work on. But like I say, the food industry is really crazy. They've done this. They have basically every kind of packaged food product you have uses this process, this HACCP process. The really fascinating one for me was when I realized that you put the metal detector at the end of the pipeline, because like nuts and washers can fall off all the machinery between the point where you make the food and it package it. So you have to test it at the end. Silly little things like that. It's obvious in hindsight. And that's what happens when I look at the flow of a game, look at the data points I want, I go, oh yeah, no point in testing their choice there because their footprints don't make any difference, but their direction of change does, or whatever. Sorry, what was any other questions over the here?
Yeah, I want to continue on that point because if you want to make a SWOT analysis for your game, like where it's strengths and weaknesses, the way you described it just now, isn't that like trying to predict what the SWOT is going to say instead of?
That's a very valid question. And you do, when you're doing the process properly, you're doing strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats is a classic kind of marketing way of looking at product design, and I do it a lot. Yes, of course you do, but hopefully, if you've done your SWOT analysis correctly, what you're doing is you're setting hypotheses, and then you're testing them. So I'm a big believer in kind of evidence-based design. Data will tell you what people have done. It will not tell you what people will do. It can help you predict, but only by testing your hypothesis. And so you're quite right. We need to work out what our SWOT analysis is. Where are our strengths and weaknesses? But it's a little bit more abstract than just that, because by looking at this hazard analysis process, it's not the only way to do it. If anyone's interested, I did a blog post on this talk, which is on the Unity blog. Just look up Oscar Clark Unity blog, you'll find it. There's a link to another article I wrote in Develop about a year and a half, 2 years ago, about HACCP, H-A-C-C-P. But feel free to go look at that. But one of the things I hope you do when you look at the hazard process is you look at the flow of the player through your game. So it's slightly different from looking at strengths and weaknesses, because you're not actually saying what the strengths and weaknesses are. You're saying, what do people do? Where is a decision point occur? Is that something that's significant for me to measure? So you're making some assumptions, yes, but hopefully you're doing it on the basis of your understanding of people's play of your game. And the important thing about HACCP and all these processes is you take the data, you review it, and you implement changes to your data points. That's the really interesting thing. Don't assume that you'll get the data capture right, whatever your expertise. Deciding the frequency that you're going to capture people's position is incredibly variable to the game. So for example, a first-person shooter, I probably want to know your every single footstep. In PlayStation Home, I only needed to know your vector changes because I wanted to know where you were moving, but it didn't really matter minute by minute. The effect of choosing only changes in vector was that we saved gigabytes of data. That's not just storage issue, but it's throughput issue, it's concurrent data upload issue. So it was worth it to cut that down. But to your point, it's a delicate, scary line that we have to pursue because we're not going to get it right every time. So we try and get as many data points as we can afford, but we try to apply some common sense to them. And then we can use that data to do the SWOT analysis properly. Harder to do the opportunities and the threats, but you know, because no one's sharing data. We should be sharing data, I think, but that's a different subject, nothing to do with Unity, just a personal thing. Does that help? Cool. I think we probably, time's supposed to be up. I will take a quickie if anyone's got a very quick one. Or you can come and grab me afterwards. Very quick one right here. Oh, yeah. And remember, this is just me, this is just mine. You don't have to necessarily, you'll probably find flaws in it. Oh, you just want to take a photo, that's what it is. Okay. Like I say, all this is listed up onto the Unity blog as well. And there's also a video of me doing a webinar on it. I quite often do webinars. I think the next one's going to probably be about a sort of 101 guide to marketing for indie game developers. So that's it. Hope that was useful. If it was, tell everybody.